Okay, I think we're back in business. Our next item of on the agenda is discussion and discussion and possible action regarding project delivery methods for a municipal building construction.
Okay, again, this topic started with a conversation I had with Attorney Rossmeisel after our last workshop to discuss the space needs issue, or during that workshop, rather. The topic of design build came up as a project delivery method. And I know a couple of us in the room weren't confident that that was permitted. I know Chief Moss felt that way in the state of Wisconsin. So I called Andy and we talked about this, and Andy confirmed for us that the design build method of delivering a project, at least municipal building project in Wisconsin, is not permissible. Andy then went on to tell me that there were two basic delivery methods for building projects in the state of Wisconsin. One was to hire an architect and a construction manager. One was to hire an architect who subsequently put out the bids for the project, but I'll let Andy discuss that in greater detail because I think we needed to establish that design build was not an option for us as we move forward with the space needs project.
That's true, and we can easily cross that one off the list. I will tell you a couple of things to start out. First of all, I plan today just to talk at a very high level. Once you get into the project and decide, for example, possibly you decide to go with a construction manager, there are other sort of options within that realm that you can talk about it. That might be putting the cart in front of the horse today, but to the extent we need to, we can get into some detail. The other thing that I'll talk about is Nick has a lot of experience in this realm too, and McMahon in general. Maybe a little bit more geared towards roads and municipal infrastructure, but I do invite Nick, to the extent you want to weigh in when we're talking about delivery methods, please correct me, add to it, tell me I'm wrong, whatever the case is. So the first thing that I sort of want to talk about is the difference between services and public works or public construction. At the highest level, generally, services do not have to be publicly bid. Labor or materials do. All right? So what are services? Services would include engineering services, legal services, architectural services, construction management services. Because construction management isn't building, it's managing a project. Typically, a construction manager would put together bid packages where there would be a public bid for labor and materials. So that is also considered a service. From your perspective, first question I'm often asked is, where do you start? What sort of service provider, aside from Nick and I here today in a professional capacity, where do you usually start going down the road of planning for a construction project? Usually it would be an architect that you would hire first, because you can't hire the design build combo. It would be an architect who is paid to both obviously design a building, but engage in providing you advice as to delivery methods that come after that. That design can come in a complete design, but oftentimes you'll have a partial design so you can get numbers that will come even before they handle a complete design. At the end of the day, when we get through this, that probably will be my recommendation, to consider perhaps interviewing or somehow hiring an architect to take this to the next level. But as far as delivery methods go, sort of the old school method, more common up until 25 years ago, was you would hire an architect who would design an entire building or structure to great detail, such great detail that you could have multiple general contractors submit bids for an entire project. That's still used sometimes today, but that's becoming less common. What you see more often today is the architect would design to a good level of detail, but then either the architect itself or another hired gun, so to speak, a dedicated construction manager, would be brought in to take the design and run the project from there. In that case, you might have a construction manager divide up one big project into multiple bid packages. And then, when this goes out to bid, you may have a steel and concrete contractor. Sometimes that's one package, sometimes that's separate. Plumbing, fire suppression, right on down the line. Maybe you have 8 bid packages for a project like a remodel of this size. The construction manager can also engage in some common sense tweaks to the original plan with the architect to cut costs. That's not uncommon. I guess before I open it up for questions, I probably also should cover the type of construction manager that you might hire. There are construction managers who are capable of self-performance, and there are construction managers who don't self-perform anything. A bolter Myron, for instance, can often serves in a construction management capacity, but they will on occasion also self-perform. So how does that work? They would put together a bid package in a construction manager capacity, and then sometimes, depending upon how you write the contract, they'd be allowed to bid to themselves. Other construction managers, like for instance a Hoffman, or I'm working in Harrison right now in a fire station, a construction manager by the name of Wendell doesn't self-perform anything. And they would, I assume McManus, when you serve in a construction management role, you're not self-performing. You'd hire all subs.
Myron or both, they might do one piece of it, but
Mhm.
the chunk is excavator, different contract.
Right. So it really depends. There are some pros and cons to allowing self-performance. It does certainly allow for an after bid opening coordination between construction manager and contractor. It can result in a lower price at times. One thing that you have to watch out for is we have good local contractors, but still something that you would need to look out for is to make, particularly in bigger cities, there's this thing called bid rigging, where you have a construction manager put together a package that only they could possibly win, right? Because who else does concrete, glass, steel? You put together a convoluted package like that, you're probably only going to get a big general contractor and probably only the construction manager bidding. So some transparency things to watch out for. There are other subcategories of construction management. I don't know that we need to get into that level of detail now. For instance, the level of risk that a construction manager would have in the project can change based upon the construction management model. But I think probably the way that a project here would look is that you would interview somebody to design the building. You would pick who you want to do that. But then you wouldn't hire them for an entire design right away, because you need to go to the electorate in all likelihood to get elector approval for any building project. What you'd probably do is hire the architect in some sort of interim capacity to design to a certain percentage. I don't know what that threshold would be, maybe 20 or something, just enough so the architect can shop for numbers, so you have some idea of what the project would cost. Because without that, it might be very difficult to go to the electors and ask for any amount of money. Then possibly take it to the electors, get approval, then finish the architectural process. Have the architect talk with you again about delivery methods. That's not something that you'd have to decide today. Probably you would look at hiring a construction manager, although it is possible, like I said, for the architect to put together a gigantic bid package and then major construction managers would bid on that. More common now, you'd look at hiring a construction manager down the road. But then deciding who that's going to be, whether they can bid to themselves, and what specific delivery method, be it contractor at risk or others that you decide to go with. That's sort of my high-level summary. Nick, please tell me what I missed.
Well, I thought you did a good job.
Thank you. Any questions?
So the importance of this discussion today, from my perspective, is we have to decide when and how we're taking this to the electorate. And today, all we have to present to the electorate are the numbers that we received from Zimmerman. Now, those were both Zimmerman's numbers, and then Zimmerman had Myron, basically look at the project as well. So we have basically two sets of numbers, but the numbers are high-level numbers. They include all aspects of the project, including the service agreement issues, the construction manager costs, the architectural costs, uncertainty about the site that we're talking about, dubious soils is how it's described. So we don't have the firm construction costs that we would have to take to the electorate. We would have to somehow back out of those numbers that we received from John, those things that don't require us to take before the electorate. But that's all we have today to present. We don't have, I don't believe, enough to create renderings or diagrams or drawings. We have some rough sketches of, we don't even have floor plans for the public safety building. We have some conceptual floor plans for town hall, which is not part of this project per se. So we really don't have anything to show the electorate. We could talk about numbers. Now, if we were to consider, as Andy talked about, retaining an architect and having them design the project to a 20 or 30% level, at that threshold, they would probably be in a position to do some rendering, some diagrams, have some rough floor plan sketches, things that we could use as displays to present to the electorate. In addition, we would have an ability, I think, to go out and get more refined costs, because we would now have a sense for what the project was going to look like. And the experts, I think, would be able to take those schematics from the architect and translate them into building costs that are more perhaps reliable or refined than what we've gotten to this point in time. John hasn't talked with us about finishes, for example, or the quality of materials to be used. He's tried to describe for me that they use a range, from very high-end finishes and whatnot down to a baseline, and they try to stay somewhere in the middle. So I would think that once we have some more level of detail that could be provided by an architect, we'd be in a better position to have more reliable cost figures to take before the electorate. But I think this discussion is important now because we haven't talked about when this is going to the electorate. We've talked about possibly doing something as soon as this fall. But that might hinge, I know I've talked to Chief Moss a little bit about this, might hinge upon how soon we expect to start the project. Obviously with approval, if we get the approval. If we're talking about beginning the project, the construction of project in April of 2028, hypothetically, we could back up from that period of time and determine how soon do we have to take this to the electorate. It could go this fall, theoretically, with the information we have today, the numbers we've received from Zimmerman, or we could look at retaining an architect and do reach that design threshold, which might result in us presenting this to the electorate a little bit later, perhaps as late as the annual meeting in 2027, which would still, I believe, enable us to begin the project with their approval in spring of 2028. So I think the board has to think about and perhaps come to some conclusion, whether today or in the near future, how you want to proceed. You know, whether you'd want to go to the electorate with what limited information we have today, or whether you'd want to start the design phase by hiring an architect and taking it to that threshold and using that information to take before the electorate.
My personal opinion is you're gonna have better luck interacting with the public if you have renderings and some sort of blueprint. You used the 20 to 30% number in your comments. I was thinking it would have to be more like 80%. I mean,
Well,
I don't know what the industry standard is for
yeah,
that.
I mean, I talked to John Sabanash rather about this also, and he described it as that 20 to 30% will deliver schematics. And then once the schematics are done, you have a sense for, I think, what the building might look like, and then they're gonna get into developing the actual construction documents. So in my mind, it's blueprints.
20% gets you a heck of a lot. It gets you a lot more than you'd think,
Yeah.
because so much of this building right now is pipes and wires, and all of that stuff is intricately designed. That's the other 70%, right? You're gonna know what the building is going to look like pretty early on in the design process. I don't know if that's 20 or 30%, but in that, you're gonna have pictures of a building. You will not design to the fine level of detail that you ultimately need to build it, but Nick, please feel free to weigh in on
Yeah,
that.
I agree. 20 to 30% going to the public is probably where you want to be, in my opinion. I think you're going to get much better feedback, and you're going to go into it with a higher level of confidence on the cost side than we're probably what you have at the moment.
So, and then for all that other stuff, like the design of HVAC, they'll typically use averages, sometimes on a square foot, just to fill in the gaps. But most folks don't want to design to 100% until they know what they can afford.
If I can just chime in a little bit. So Chief Denzine and I visited a number of different facilities, and what was interesting is that there are a couple architects that have been building public safety buildings, and most of the municipalities modeled their buildings off of one of the other ones. And so it's kind of like, I'll take the break room from McFarland and I'll put it with the apparatus bay from Caledonia, and so I don't envision it would be fully custom for Grand Chute from starting from zero. If, depending upon, what architect you retain, you're going to start from something and massage it into what works for our respective departments. So I don't know how challenging or how time intensive it would be to get from 0 to 20, given that there's a lot of data out there, a lot of buildings out there that have been created with a lot of input from chiefs of other departments. And all that information, I think, provides a solid foundation for us to start from.
So, I guess, are you saying that you don't see the need then to do the architect at this point, to go to the 20-30% and then actually do the electors at the annual meeting in April?
No, actually, I think quite the opposite. I wholeheartedly agree with Supervisor Gehring. I think the renderings and a floor plan will be very important to tell your story to the electorate. But what my comments are, I don't know that it's going to be as expensive or as time consuming as you might think if we're able to rely on some of that stuff that's already been created. You might be able to get something relatively inexpensive and get something in front of the electorate, which I think will help tell that story.
Sounds to me like you're saying 20% to 30% might be reasonable to get what you need without going the full way.
So who's actually gonna be telling the story to the electorate? Is it gonna be the chiefs?
I think we're going to have a big role in
Or is it gonna be
it.
the town board?
I think everyone's going to have a big role in it.
A good architect can help you along in the process too. These folks are good at generating excitement and answering questions. I think you definitely want a representative from the architectural firm in the
But
room.
basically, you're talking about just maybe using John and you guys, and you're maybe talking about going a little bit further to the 20 or 30% level with an architect other than maybe John. Is that, am I understanding that right?
I'm not talking about using John.
Yeah, I think we end up having, we do a bid process, get an architect, and that they can develop some plans, like we were talking to 20-30%, and then we do a multifaceted approach, right? So not only do you have the chiefs do open houses and town hall meetings where you question and stuff, but the board also pushes it and presents the information, along with having renderings or, I don't think they need to do a 3D model, but if that's their magic, so be it. But I think that would all give the public a great interpretation of what we want to do, where it's going to be, what the investment would be, and how they can physically see it, the costs in comparison to neighboring communities. We think it's probably going to be right in the area where it should, and that would be supported by the public.
The only thing I would correct there is it wouldn't be a bid process. You'd probably come up with a short list of architects that you'd like to have in to talk about the project, and then have interviews and decide who you're comfortable with. That's probably what you meant by bid. Yeah, like an RFP.
That's,
Yeah.
so we would do an RFP.
Yeah, but it is the architect, I think, that you are gonna have see through the entire project. I mean, it's.
Ideally, for sure.
It's the architect that when they get done with whatever the percentages, the other day when I was on the call with John, he talked about it being the schematics. That's how he referred to it, whether it's 20, 25, 30%, whatever. But I think that if we use those schematics to get approval from the electorate, then that same architect is gonna continue on with the work. I don't think you'd hire somebody just to do that and then hire a different architect. Because I think that a lot of the work that will go into developing the construction documents will have evolved out of the schematic work that's done initially.
Unless something went terribly wrong in the first 20 or 30%, that would be almost unheard of to bring somebody new in, because then you start from scratch.
So is the financial piece also discussed this early in the process so that the electorate knows where the money might come from? Whether it's going to be completely debt or some other combination?
Well, I think that's part of the side conversation. I think you need to know what you need and what it's going to cost, and then the third, before you go to the electorate, the third major discussion is how do you pay for it? And maybe you bring Ellers into the room for a discussion like that, or Baird, right? All possibilities.
But it's all consumed by the public and taken into consideration when they vote on whether or not to agree to this.
Right.
All that information will be there. Okay.
And that's because this project will almost certainly exceed the threshold that the board has on an ongoing basis from the electorate.
So, Administrator Peterson, would you and staff be able to put together an RFP for an architect and actually recommend somebody to us to hire in hopes of being able to obtain a October or November electoral meeting?
Well, I think with Attorney Rossmeisel's assistance, we could put together an RFP. Then I have no idea how many architectural firms would respond, but we'd have to create some sort of a scoring mechanism, I think, and that's something that Public Works is well versed in. Nick, you may have some experience with that as well, so that we can determine based upon a scoring methodology, which architect we're going to choose. I've participated in that. I've seen some samples of that, but I think that would be important. And maybe Andy, you might have some experience in developing a mechanism as well for scoring the people who would submit proposals. And whether or not it'd be ready for an October meeting or a November meeting would be dependent upon how quickly the firm we hire could take us to that 20 to 30% threshold. I don't know.
You could blast out an RFP to the world. You might it might be more efficient to consider putting together a short list, in my opinion. Who goes on it? I mean, I guess the first question is whether McMahon wants to throw his hat in the ring, but if not, I suppose, you know, Nick and McMahon would be a good resource in helping you put together a list. Also, Chief, talking to who around the state has designed the buildings that you like, that were delivered on time with good results.
Yeah, and there were two. There were two companies two different architects that were involved in all of the buildings that we toured.
Who was it, out of curiosity?
So FGMA and Bray were the two that have been building public safety buildings in Wisconsin. Now, it's not the only two, you know, but those are the two that were involved in all of the projects that we toured, and they seem to they've delivered, right?
If you're going to electorate, you gotta build some time in there for the financial part, because if you're trying to present that, how we're gonna fund it, whether it's through Barry or Ellers or whoever you're doing that, you have to get a budget number first, and then you gotta give it to them to run a scenario for you about the funding side of it, so that all that's gonna be done before you have that meeting. So you wanna make sure you have all of it.
So maybe October, November might not work. However, the proper way to proceed with this is actually to hire an architect and do this process and get this stuff ready. And then that meeting date will be dependent upon when this is ready to go.
I believe so. I mean, I don't know how long it would take them to reach that threshold that we're talking about. Obviously, there's time involved in putting out an RFP and receiving proposals and scoring the architects as well. That's going to take some time. And then once they, from my experience anyway, once somebody is selected, some of what we've already done will be repeated most likely. I mean, the architects are going to have to meet with the chiefs to talk about their needs, and you know, we've already got a program, but they'll probably want to create their own or go through whatever process they use to determine what our needs are before they actually start, you know, drawing something.
So the board necessarily doesn't need to approve the RFP. We basically need staff to do the RFP, send it out to whoever they're gonna send it out to, and basically provide the results to us. Is that right?
That, I think we have to ask Haley where the money's coming from for the architect. And then I want to ask Andy, I mean, you talked about some of those different project delivery methods, but is there value in bringing on the construction manager during that first 20 to 30% during the development of the schematics? Will there be any cost savings that a construction manager would identify during that phase, or is it more likely to take place once they move from schematics into whatever the next phase is?
I usually see the CM come on a little later.
Later?
Now, the architect will typically, in the region that you are, look for a contractor that has a good handle on the labor force, because, so maybe they would call Myron or Bolt or somebody else to get numbers to come up with their estimate. But you're not bringing on that contractor in a CM capacity quite at that point. Whether they get paid something for their services, I guess that's an issue for discussion. But I think it is pretty important to hear from your architect what delivery method they prefer to use, and to have a very similar conversation with your architect to what we're having here in the room today. And you'll dial in above and beyond whether you're hiring a CM and whether they're going to be allowed to bid to themselves. You're going to dial in on some precise terms that should or shouldn't be included in the contract based upon the design and where they're at with the design.
Yeah, I think that could be part of the RFP, like that's a deliverable for from the architect, is a discussion and guidance on assisting with that decision-making process.
On delivery method, amongst other things.
Yeah.
So
Greg,
does the board need to make a motion on this?
Well,
Or can we just direct staff to start working on it?
I'd actually like to make a motion on it.
Can we back up just a second? I just want to get a little bit more clarification on when we can actually want to go to the electorate. Greg and I have had conversations where we wouldn't necessarily be delaying the timeline if we waited until next year's annual meeting instead of rushing things through in October and November of this year. Do you want to speak to that just a little bit?
I believe that would be the case. I mean, I believe that if we were to bring on an architect soon, and they started working on develop or designing to this 30% threshold, if we went to the electorate in April and we got approval, they have about 70% of the work to do before they're ready to, we're ready to bring in somebody, a contractor, to start building the building. That could be achieved, I think, by the beginning of the construction season in 2028. I believe that if we got electorate approval sooner, let's say at the end of this year, I don't know that it's going to dramatically alter the construction schedule. They might be able to do some things because that design would still be ongoing through 2027. They might be able to do some site prep or things like that in late 2027. That would enable them to get a jump start on construction in 28. But I do think that based on where we are today, that construction's likely going to begin in 2028. So I don't know that getting electorate approval in October of this year is going to dramatically alter that. If we got electorate approval in April of 2027, based upon the 30% work done by our architect, I think we'd be ready to break ground in 2028 during the beginning of the construction season. So I don't think it dramatically changes things in terms of when we're going to build.
Now, this RFP would just be for the concept of the public safety building, the police, the courts, and fire station 3, not for the future town hall remodeling, correct?
Correct.
That'll be separate.
Correct.
So, I mean, in any case, whether you decide that you want to go to the electors in this fall or April, I guess the first piece of the puzzle is actually authorizing Administrator Peterson along with staff to actually do an RFP, hire an architect, and prepare the necessary information to prepare for a public meeting. So that would be my motion.
Oh, wait a minute. You said hire an architect. I assume that you want the architects to come back to the board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You'd actually be doing the RFP and doing your results and actually recommending to the board to hire an architect. Yeah, you're right.
Or possibly bringing in top candidates for you to interview and score and rate a recommendation.
But we need a recommendation from staff based on the information.
For sure. Yep.
Is there a second? Hearing none.
If I could, I'd just like to get Haley to weigh in, briefly, because obviously we're talking about moving forward with this project this year.
Right, I mean, we still have the contingency that's left
Okay.
from, but I don't know how much money we're talking about, so it's hard to
Well,
say.
I mean, I can tell you that in the figures we received from the architect we've worked with, where they did this high-level cost estimating, they projected the total costs of the architect to be about $2 million. But we're talking about something, initially anyway, substantially less, because we're only wanting them to design to like the 20% threshold, at which time we can't move forward without electorate approval. So we'd have to craft that.
Well, maybe you craft it. You're going to learn a lot from these interviews with the architect, and you may hear some creative proposals from architects. Some will sort of, I'm not going to say they're going to take a loss on the initial 30%, but some front load their fees, some back load them. And I mean, we could put great detail into this RFP exactly what we want, but I don't know that you know what you want right here. You may want to invite them in, talk to them about how they would propose to charge for their fees. That's just an idea that I'm throwing out there. And then not only decide who you're going to hire, but how you're going to pay them also. Because this is professional services. This is not, it's not like an apples to apples bid where the same services would be offered by each architect.
I'm looking for some clarification, so there was just an exchange. We're talking about a safety building, a merged law enforcement, fire, safety building, but we are not gonna include any numbers on the remodeling of this facility then, when we go to the public?
Not at this point, and I don't know that remodeling of this building requires us to go to the electorate for approval. I mean, we're not constructing a new building, and Andy, feel free to weigh in, but my understanding is that there's a distinction between building a new building and remodeling, new carpet, new paint, remodeling within this building. Now,
There's a fine line between maintenance and public works, and again, I don't know where you cross it, but these two projects are unrelated enough. I mean, if you know that this has to happen at the same time, it might make sense to include it in the same package, but
and I don't know that we know that. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that they're two separate and distinct projects.
I agree with that.
PD moves out,
Mhm.
and we have the opportunity to do something here, whatever that may be. It could theoretically be as simple as Public Works moves into the space that PD vacated and we're done, or the board can then at that point in time consider doing a more substantial remodeling, which we have had costed. We know approximately what that cost would be, but I don't know that decision has to be made today. And so in my mind, that separates these two into distinct projects.
and I tend to agree. It's not really a legal opinion, but from a practical matter, you can only handle so many complicated things at one time. It probably would be better to get the project done, the new building, and then consider what, if anything, needs to happen here after that.
So there's a motion on the floor to authorize Administrator Peterson and staff to issue an RFP and come back to the board with recommendations for an architect. Is there a second? Sorry, kind
No,
of.
that's okay. I didn't hear one either.
Without a second, I don't know where you go, for what it's worth.
I think we're waiting for a new motion.
Okay.
Can someone reword the motion?
So we'll have to have a little more discussion to mine into that, though. I get, you can make a distinction between the safety building and this facility, but the reality is that the two have been attached for at least the last year. The concept of the separate safety building came up just a few months ago. So if someone was to tell me that, the safety building gets done for, let's just say 15 million or whatever, but then the remodeling here, because there's no expansion, remodeling here is going to run 2 million. That's different, but that's not what we've been. I mean, Savanash certainly hasn't described it like that.
Well, he's described a complete remodel of this building, but those decisions, I think, would come later. I mean, the board would have to decide, I think, later what that's going to be. If we were to go to the electorate with the combined project, we would have, particularly if we hired the architect and designed 20 to 30%, I think, very detailed numbers for what the public safety building was going to cost. We would not have that for the remodel project. We could remodel to whatever scope and size the board decides at that point in time when we have to make that decision, which is going to be as we near conclusion or completion of the public safety building. We could choose a $2 million remodel, or John is, I think Myron projected 10 million, I think John said 12 or vice versa, for the complete remodel of this building. But none of those decisions have been made yet. So at the last workshop, the board committed to the public safety building concept, but the board did not commit to any, the scope of the remodeling project for town hall. Those are still discussions and decisions that will have to be made in the future.
So how do you then, if we do the renderings on a public safety building and we have 3 or 4 community outreach events to increase awareness, the question's gonna come up, how are you gonna backfill, right, what's being vacated, and how much is that gonna cost? And I certainly think that it would be responsible to have some number for the public to react to on that. I mean, anybody else not agreeing with me or disagreeing with me on that? Because it's
range would
the
be
gorilla in the room, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what are you gonna do with the building?
And we have some, high-level opinions about how we might do that, what it might cost if we were to do it, but we haven't made any decisions yet about the scope of that project. We know what we can do here, but we haven't firmly decided what we're going to do here. I believe that's accurate anyway. We only just decided, to commit to the public safety building at our last workshop, but we haven't had any discussions about what our, firm plan is for this building once we're out, once PD is out and has vacated. We could begin those discussions. We could take a similar approach certainly, but, we don't know whether or not we're gonna get approval on the public safety building, so I don't know how deep we wanna go into design of the, or the remaining space once PD vacates at this point in time. I was always looking at it as a separate project that we would have to begin acting on, discussing and acting upon once we saw the public safety building, come to fruition.
It's certainly gonna be easier to remodel this building once you have the part, that bulk of the people out of here. So it shouldn't take as much. Maybe, are you thinking that you might wanna have some sort of drawings or concepts of this for the annual meeting in April?
Yeah, so
that we have an idea of how the building is gonna be replaced.
I appreciate the framing of that question. So that is correct. I just think we need to be prepared to have some sort of information for the public about what it might cost. I mean, if it's something they can do for 2 million, that's one thing. But if somebody says, well, it's gonna cost you 7 or 8 million to remodel for public works and for other entities in this building, I think that's something the public ought to know as we're walking down this path.
I think you could have that discussion. I mean, we know, for example, we've talked for a number of years about remodeling the bonus room upstairs. And I want to say that was in the ballpark of like $2 million, I think, to do that bonus room upstairs. So theoretically, we could remodel that bonus room, Public Works could move into the vacated PD, and we could be done, theoretically. So we could do that for $2 million. We've got diagrams and floor plans for a much more expansive remodel that would include substantial remodeling downstairs in the PD's lower level to accommodate a training room and park storage and a variety of other functions downstairs for Public Works. That's closer to the $10 to $12 million range. But none of those decisions have been made yet. So we could talk about it. I think with the electorate that we have different plans for how to use this building afterwards, and we could show them the diagrams that we've received from Zimmerman. But I think we have to reinforce the fact that no decisions have been made on that project yet.
And I don't think we need to do the bonus room portion if we're doing the public safety building concept. Part of that deal was we were told that it was gonna probably be a little bit more cost effective to do that separate public safety building, as opposed to trying to do that here. And then, of course, we're completely built out here. And part of the, I thought the other part of the puzzle was that we would be utilizing this space here at the town hall like that bonus room for future growth. If we did police here now and did all the public works remodeling and everything else, this campus would be built out, period. Cause I don't think we can go up.
Yeah,
So
and we can't go up.
part of what Sabonesh did was to scope out reuse of the current building. You know, the places that are really tight or poorly used could be expanded and reused to offer better continuity between departments, some more conference room space, that kind of stuff, in addition to what was going on with Public Works. I think bringing the board back into that discussion is what we're gonna have to do for the time being, just to make sense out of it.
Yeah, John had envisioned that the lower level bonus room would not be touched. PD would continue to utilize the long-term evidence storage space down there. I think that was part of what we had discussed. And then there would be about 900 square feet of the upper bonus room that would remain unfinished. But Human Resources and IT would move into the upper bonus room here as part of the design that John had created, or the rough plan that John had created. So we would have less unused space here than we have today if PD moves out, but some of that upper bonus room would be consumed by offices, Human Resources, and IT. In the design that John gave us for Town Hall after PD vacates.
I can just add to that real quick. I think what Brad's getting at, we don't have to spend any more money, I don't think, in architecture for design remodel of this building. We have basically a rough idea. We talked about what the unallocated space would be now with what we have for a rough idea. So, because that's going to be a question, like you said, we have that. We can already look through it, what we have left. So that was, potentially a satisfactory answer to that. And then we have a cost of what it would take to do it. So.
But I think we haven't shared it with the board, and so I think
Right.
that's.
Yeah, just at a high level was just
Right.
what the unallocated space is and what that cost would be. But it probably should be, at least the board needs to be aware of all that information so that when you get those questions, when you have those meetings, it's going to come up because it's another cost that's going to happen. Because if we don't remodel this building, we're going to have a lot of unallocated space in the basement for sure. If it exists how it does today, we can't really utilize it in its current capacity.
So, but that's part of the awareness campaign to it, just so the public understands when they choose to fund the public safety building, which I agree with, but that they also go armed during these public presentations, understanding what is left over. So I apologize, Supervisor Ailing, I didn't second your motion because it was strictly focused on an RFP for the safety building. I just think there has to be an emphasis added that addresses the RFP issue, but that addresses the education of the public about here what may need to happen, what might be left over.
I do think that the education campaign, though, is different than the grant of authority, right? So when we go to and Andy, feel free to weigh in, when we go to the electorate and ask for a grant of authority, we're asking, I believe, for the dollar amount necessary to build the public safety building. We may want to make them, there are going to be more costs associated with the public safety building. There's going to be architectural fees, there's going to be construction management fees. There are other costs that make that project more expensive than the actual construction costs, but I believe the grant of authority is for the construction costs. The grant of authority is not for the architect, the construction manager, the remodeling of this building. So there's a difference between the education campaign and the scope of the whole project from start to finish, and the grant of authority that we need from the electorate to, have their
I would
approval to build the
agree with that.
project.
I mean, there are obviously some gray areas that could go into either bucket, but as a general rule, the services to get there would not count towards the authority granted by the electors.
I guess I looked at I don't disagree with Supervisor Gehring in terms of having to get some information together to give to the electors in regards to this building. I just don't think it needs to be the first piece of the puzzle to get the whole concept moving. I think we've got time to get that together, to have those pieces for the electorate, but the biggest part is getting the RFP out, getting the architect on board, getting the process started, so that things can be done in a timely manner. The pieces of Supervisor Gearing that I think you're talking about in regards to the town hall, my thinking is those numbers can possibly be obtained from Zimmerman to support.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just
So
said.
that's
I
separate
just
from my
thought that
motion.
the original motion was specific to a new safety building and nothing else. And I just think there's gotta be a partnership there going
Well,
down.
okay, so if I do a friendly amendment to that motion that I
Well,
made,
No, just
Make a
redo your
new
motion
motion.
with,
Yeah.
to
Make a
include
new
a,
motion.
to include an emphasis as part of the public awareness campaign about the remodeling of this building.
okay, I'll try. So I'm making a motion for Administrator Peterson and staff to prepare an RFP for an architect to be able to design to about the 20-30% level, so that we have all the documentation that we need for a public meeting, and also put an emphasis on town hall remodeling with whatever resources they think is appropriate, whether it be just Zimmerman's information, with whatever resources they believe would be appropriate, whether it be just Zimmerman, or if they think that they need to add something onto that RFP, I'd give them that ability.
And I'll
Does
second
something
that.
like that make sense?
I'll make it make sense.
Thank you.
And I'll second that. Thank you,
Ready, ready,
thank you
ready,
for that, Supervisor Handling, thank you.
I think my blood sugar's getting low.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion on the table signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those, any opposed? We are adjourned.